There's something haunting about driving at night, especially on highways that seem to stretch endlessly into the void. One such drive in August 2022 left me with a memory I can't explain. A night that blurred the lines between reality and something far more sinister. I was on my way to visit my brother in Boise, Idaho, traveling from a small town in Oregon. The route was straightforward, mostly empty highways cutting through vast farmland and dense patches of forest. I had left later than planned and found myself on the road well past midnight. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the highway lit only by my headlights. The world around me was eerily silent, and the rhythmic hum of the tires was the only sound accompanying me. That's when I noticed something odd. The mile markers weren't changing. I passed one that read 54 and made a mental note, as I always did on long drives. But 10 minutes later, I saw the same marker again, 54. I shook it off, telling myself I must have missed the next one. But as the minutes passed, the same marker kept reappearing. Each time, it looked identical, the same dent in the metal, the same patch of weeds growing beside it. A knot of unease began to form in my chest. I checked the GPS on my phone, but it wasn't working. The screen was frozen, the map showing a blank, gray grid. I tried refreshing it, but the signal was gone. My phone, which had been fully charged when I left, suddenly dropped to 10%. The unease turned to dread as I realized I had no idea where I was, or how long I'd been driving. About 30 minutes later, I saw something up ahead, a gas station. Relief flooded through me as I pulled into the lot, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the cracked pavement. The station looked old and run down, with rusted pumps and a flickering sign that read, "Open 24 hours." I stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting against my skin. The place was eerily quiet, with no other cars or people in sight. As I approached the door, it swung open on its own, the creak echoing into the stillness. "Hello?" I called out, stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit, the shelves stocked with dusty, outdated products. A faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. At the counter, a man stood with his back to me. He was tall and thin, wearing a worn flannel shirt and a trucker's cap. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Can you help me? I think I'm lost." The man didn't respond. "Sir?" I said again, stepping closer. Slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes were dark, almost completely black, and his face was unnaturally pale. A faint smile played on his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. A chill ran down my spine as I took a step back. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old map, sliding it toward me. "Take this," he said, "and don't stop until you're off this road." I glanced at the map, its surface yellowed and torn. The highway I was on was marked in red, with the words "Do not enter" scrawled in bold letters across it. When I looked back up, the man was gone. The counter was empty, and the air in the station felt heavier, almost suffocating. I didn't wait to find out what was happening. Grabbing the map, I ran back to my car and sped out of the lot, the tires screeching against the pavement. The highway was still eerily empty, the same endless stretch of road stretching out before me. I glanced at the map, trying to make sense of it, but the landmarks didn't match anything I'd seen before. That's when I noticed the figure. In the distance, standing in the middle of the road, was a woman. She was wearing a long coat, her hair blowing in the wind. As I got closer, I realized she wasn't moving. I honked the horn, but she didn't react. My stomach twisted as I swerved to avoid her, my headlights briefly illuminating her face. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her expression frozen in a look of pure terror. As I passed her, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. The road behind me was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air in the car grew colder, and the engine began to sputter, the headlights flickering. That's when the radio turned on. Static filled the car, loud and jarring, making me jump. A faint voice broke through, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Then, clear as day, I heard it. "Turn back." My heart raced as I gripped the wheel, determined to keep going. But the road began to change. The asphalt cracked and buckled, the edges crumbling away into darkness. The trees lining the highway twisted unnaturally, their branches reaching toward the car like skeletal hands. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, desperate to escape. Finally, I saw a light in the distance. It was faint at first, but as I got closer, it grew brighter, illuminating a small wooden bridge. The bridge looked old and unstable, its planks creaking under the weight of the car as I crossed. When I reached the other side, the road straightened out, the strange darkness lifting. I didn't stop until I reached my brother's house, my hands still trembling on the wheel. To this day, I don't know what happened on that highway, or what would have happened if I hadn't kept driving. But every time I pass an old gas station or an empty road sign, I feel a chill run down my spine, because I know that somewhere out there, the road that didn't end is still waiting. Long stretches of highway at night have a way of messing with your mind. The monotony, the darkness, and the sense of isolation can make even the most rational person start seeing things. But during a trip in late 2022, I learned that some things on the highway aren't just figments of imagination, they're real. I was driving from Albuquerque to Phoenix, a route that carved through miles of desolate desert. It was a last-minute work trip, and I hadn't planned on leaving so late, but delays at the office meant I didn't hit the road until almost 10 p.m. The first few hours were uneventful. The road was mostly empty, the occasional car passing by in the opposite direction. The radio played softly in the background, keeping me company as I watched the moonlight dance across the desert landscape. But as the clock struck midnight, I noticed something unusual. A pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Highway driving meant cars would come and go, especially at night. But as I kept an eye on the lights, I realized something odd. They weren't gaining on me or fading into the distance. They were keeping the exact same distance, following me perfectly. I tried to brush it off, focusing instead on the road ahead. But no matter how far I drove, the headlights remained, constant and unwavering. After about 20 minutes, I decided to slow down, giving the other driver a chance to pass. I tapped the brakes lightly, signaling my intent, but the car behind me didn't budge. I slowed even further, practically crawling along the highway, but still, the headlights stayed the same distance behind me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't normal. I sped up, hoping to lose them. The car hummed as I pushed it to 75, then 80, then 90. The headlights grew smaller in the mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief. But just as quickly as I'd left them behind, they reappeared. This time, they were closer, too close. The blinding glare filled my rearview mirror, making it nearly impossible to see. I gripped the wheel tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. The car behind me swerved slightly, weaving from side to side as if taunting me. I honked the horn, shouting into the empty car, "What do you want?" But there was no response, only the relentless pressure of those headlights bearing down on me. Finally, I spotted an exit up ahead. The sign read, "Rest Area, 2 miles." It was a small glimmer of hope, a chance to pull over and regroup. As I neared the exit, the headlights behind me suddenly disappeared. One moment they were there, glaring and oppressive, and the next, the road was pitch black. I slowed down, scanning the highway for any sign of the car, but it was as if it had vanished into thin air. I pulled into the rest area, parking beneath a flickering street lamp. The small lot was empty, the surrounding desert stretching out into the darkness. I sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were trembling, and my mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind me? What did they want? I glanced in the rearview mirror out of habit and froze. There was a man standing behind my car. He was tall, his face obscured by shadows, and he didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still, as if waiting for something. A surge of adrenaline shot through me as I fumbled for the door lock, slamming it down with shaking hands. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" He didn't respond. Then, he took a step forward. The street lamp flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw his face. His eyes were dark and hollow, his skin pale and sunken. He wore a faint, twisted smile that sent a chill down my spine. The man reached out, his hand brushing against the back window. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as I backed out of the lot. The man didn't move. He just watched as I sped away, his figure growing smaller in the distance. My heart was racing as I merged back onto the highway, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. The road ahead was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. About 10 minutes later, the headlights reappeared. This time, they weren't behind me. They were ahead. The car was parked on the shoulder, its engine off, its lights aimed directly at me. I slowed down, my breath catching in my throat as I neared the vehicle. The windows were dark, and the driver's door hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I glanced at the ground and saw footprints leading from the car into the desert. My instinct screamed at me to keep going, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over, my headlights illuminating the abandoned car. The interior was empty, the keys still in the ignition. A strange smell lingered in the air, metallic and sour, like rust and decay. As I turned to head back to my car, a sound stopped me in my tracks. It was faint at first, like the crunch of gravel underfoot. I whipped around, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was directly in front of me. Then, out of the shadows, the man emerged. His eyes locked onto mine, and he smiled. "You should have kept driving," he said, his voice low and menacing. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet as he took a step forward. Before he could get any closer, I scrambled into my car and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life as I sped down the highway, my heart pounding like a drum. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, his silhouette framed by my fading taillights. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my hands still shaking as I pulled into a brightly lit gas station. The clerk looked up as I stumbled inside, his eyes widening at the sight of me. "You okay?" he asked. "There was a man," I stammered. He followed me." The clerk's expression darkened. "You're not the first to say that," he said. "People talk about a guy out there on that highway. They say he's been dead for years." I didn't ask any more questions. I just filled up my tank and got back on the road, vowing never to drive that stretch of highway again. Driving alone at night had always been my sanctuary. The quiet road, the cool air from the open window, and the hum of my engine were the perfect antidote to a stressful day. But one evening in the spring of 2023, I learned that even the most familiar roads can hold terrifying secrets. I was heading home to Denver after visiting friends in Boulder. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I decided to take the less-traveled back roads to avoid the monotony of the highway. The road twisted through fields and hills, with only the occasional farmhouse breaking the darkness. The drive was peaceful at first, but as I neared the old county overpass, something caught my eye. A figure was standing on the overpass, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moon. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The figure didn't move, standing perfectly still as I approached. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman. She wore a long dress, the fabric billowing slightly in the breeze. Her hair was loose, and her face was turned toward the horizon. Something about her presence felt wrong. I slowed the car, craning my neck to get a better look. The woman didn't react to the sound of my engine or the glare of my headlights. Her stillness was unnerving, as if she wasn't aware of her surroundings, or as if she were waiting for something. As I passed beneath the overpass, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting her to be gone. Instead, she had moved. She was no longer on the overpass, but standing on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. My heart pounded as I stared at her in the mirror. Her head tilted slightly, and for the first time, I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were empty, dark hollows that seemed to swallow the light. Instinct told me to drive, to leave her behind and never look back. But curiosity got the better of me. I rolled down the window slightly, my voice shaking as I called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. The air in the car grew colder, my breath fogging the glass. I rolled up the window and pressed the gas, my car lurching forward as I sped away. For the next mile, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked the mirrors constantly, half expecting to see her following me. But the road behind me was empty. Just as I started to calm down, the radio crackled to life. The static was loud and jarring, cutting through the silence like a knife. I reached for the dial, but before I could turn it off, a voice broke through. It was faint and distorted, a low whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Turn around," it said. My blood ran cold. The voice repeated itself, louder this time. "Turn around." I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and my stomach dropped. She was there, standing in the middle of the road. Her face was pale and expressionless, her empty eyes locked on me. I floored the gas, my pulse racing as the car sped down the road. The voice on the radio grew louder, overlapping with itself in a cacophony of whispers and screams. The car felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter with every passing second. And then, everything went silent. The engine sputtered and died, the car coasting to a stop on the shoulder. The headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the road. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the wheel. Then, a knock at the window shattered the silence. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The woman was standing outside the car, her face inches from the glass. She tilted her head, her hollow eyes boring into mine. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered. Before I could react, she disappeared. The car roared to life on its own, the headlights blazing as the engine revved. I didn't question it. I shifted into gear and sped away, my hands trembling on the wheel. When I finally reached home, I parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. To this day, I don't know who or what that woman was. But every time I pass an overpass at night, I can't help but look up, half expecting to see her standing there, waiting for her next victim.